To design the Lexus ES, all we had to do was listen. Your ears said exactly where to put the speakers. Your eyes told us where to put the available head-up display.
Hey Lexus, find me an alternate route.
Even your right foot helped out. It let us know you'd enjoy a little more torque. Turns out, you had a lot to tell us. We certainly heard you. The Lexus ES, not just for you, by you. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer.
This episode is brought to you by Skinny Pop Popcorn. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Oh, so light and crunchy. Skinny Pop Original Popcorn is the snack you've been searching for. Made with just 3 simple ingredients: popcorn kernels, sunflower oil, and salt. Snacking never felt or tasted so good. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Give yourself permission to snack and pick up Skinny Pop Original Popcorn today.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
If you're not already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe on Apple, Patreon, or search The Murder Diaries ad-free on Spotify to listen ad-free and get access to our subscriber-only journal entry episodes. You don't want to miss them.
Welcome to The Murder Diaries. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige.
On November 12, 1988, a group of men were hunting in a forested area of Coal Hill, Arkansas, when their dogs broke loose from the hunting party and ran off into the woods. The hunters whistled and shouted after them, hoping the dogs would return, but no such luck. So the chase was on. The men set off after the dogs and soon found themselves in a clearing near an old abandoned home. This was the old John Emery house, which was little more than a dilapidated shack where kids were known to hang out and party into the wee hours of the night. But on this morning, all was quiet. The men approached the house, circled around back, and found themselves at an opening of the crawl space. They spotted a bag and a purse nearby, both of which seemed extremely out of place. The hunters had a bad feeling about what they'd discovered. So one of the men crawled down into the dark crawl space. He almost immediately saw a body, partially covered by old wooden boards, only a leg visible in the dim light. The body belonged to that of 14-year-old Brandy Hutchins. She had been murdered and discarded here only a few days before. And among the papers that were discovered next to her was a positive pregnancy test. How did this gruesome end come to such a bubbly, happy girl who was described by all to be caring and kind? Sure, her home life had been less than perfect, even chaotic at times. But nobody saw this tragedy coming, least of all her family and friends. Brandy was a girl just trying to find the love and affection that seemed to elude her time and time again. But it seems she found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time, around someone who didn't think twice about carelessly ending her life. What happened to Brandy Hutchins? And when will she and her family get justice? This is her story.
Used to think it's in my head, but I'm walking with the dead.
Brandy's mom, Mary, was already pregnant with Brandy when she met Jerry Hutchins in 1974. But this didn't stand in the way of Mary and Jerry falling in love and eventually getting married. And on November 5th of that year, Brandy Hutchins was born. Although Jerry wasn't Brandy's biological father, he gave her his name and raised her as if she'd been his own from the very beginning. In fact, Brandy was the only child he would ever have. Jerry's niece, Julie, is Brandy's cousin, and she would be one of the closest family members Brandy would have. Julie was 9 when Brandy was born, so their relationship was more like aunt and niece. But Julie had always loved children and babies, so when Brandy was born, Julie fell in love instantly. From that point on, Julie always felt the need to be there for her young cousin and to take care of her. It was a bond that proved to be unbreakable right up to the day that Brandy died and continues to this day. In fact, we're so grateful for Julie's help in putting this episode together. We couldn't have done it without her, and we just want to thank you for trusting us to tell Brandy's story.
Julie remembers her cousin as a happy child who could make friends with anyone and was very giving as well. Brandy was known for pulling toys out of her own toy box to give to other family members as gifts at Christmas time. Outgoing, gregarious, and funny, Brandy was someone who never met a stranger.
But Brandy's childhood was less than perfect. And the main source of dysfunction in Brandy's life was her mother, who seemed incapable of providing emotional and disciplinary consistency. At times, Mary would treat Brandy like a princess who could do no wrong. But in the blink of an eye, Mary would act like she didn't want Brandy around. Conversely, Brandy's stepfather, Jerry, was a lot more patient with Brandy. While her cousin Julie remembers occasions where Jerry yelled at Brandy, she never saw him lay his hands on her or treat her in the emotionally manipulative way that Mary did. In 1984, when Brandy was 10, her parents relocated from Arkansas to Iowa. Mary and Jerry had friends who were moving there, and this seemed like the perfect time to make a fresh start for themselves. But within months of moving to Iowa, Mary met and began a relationship with another man, and she told Jerry that she wanted a divorce. Soon after this, Mary left the house one afternoon to go to the store and never returned. This abandonment was devastating to Brandy, but Jerry tried to make the most of it and moved the two of them into a small home. But this family turmoil was too much for Brandy, who began acting out more and more. She even had an altercation with a grown woman that turned into an actual fistfight. Brandy punched the woman in the face and broke her nose. It was clear that Brandy was out of control. Her cousin Julie believes that she had oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD. It's a childhood behavioral disorder in which children are excessively uncooperative, defiant, and even hostile towards kids, teachers, parents, and authority figures. Julie said, "I definitely think that in today's world, Brandy probably would have been diagnosed. And now they offer so much help for that. Of course, there's medication, but there's also therapy, and schools can do so much more. I think it's so sad that people just labeled her as being a troubled child and a mean child and didn't give her a chance. She tried so hard to be a good person, but something inside of her just wouldn't let her." With their lives turned upside down in Iowa, Jerry and Brandy moved back to Arkansas, taking up residence in a small 2-bedroom home with Jerry's brothers. Obviously, this wasn't an ideal living situation for Brandy. I mean, she was living in tight quarters with 3 grown men. There was no privacy. Despite the trouble Brandy continued to cause for Jerry, they still shared a strong bond. In fact, Julie remembers Brandy and Jerry joking around and having a good time together. But that was when Brandy was around. Because of the cramped living situation, Brandy began bouncing from one friend's house to the next, staying several nights at one place and then moving on to the next when she wore out her welcome. At one point, Brandy even moved back to Iowa to be with her mom. But that didn't last very long. Brandy caused so many problems for Mary and her new husband that Mary drove Brandy back to Arkansas and put her in a children's home without telling Jerry. It was only when he got a call from the home in the middle of the night that Jerry knew Brandy had been back in Arkansas at all. It turns out Brandy had gotten into a fight with someone, and the children's home informed him that she was being kicked out and he had to come pick her up. Tired of witnessing Brandy's tumultuous life from the sidelines, Julie opened up her home and gave Brandy a new place to live. She enrolled Brandy in school and provided a stable environment with love and routine. This became a time of temporary peace in Brandy's life. But soon the structure and the rules began to wear thin, and Brandy was back to her old, willful, disobedient ways. Brandy eventually returned to live with Jerry and his brothers, and she returned to moving from one friend's house to the next.
Due to behavioral issues, Brandy was expelled from school in the fall of 1988. The Department of Children and Family Services tried to find her a bed at a school for emotionally distressed youth, but Brandy's ineffectual case manager either couldn't or didn't want to complete the process necessary to get Brandy admitted, so the plan fell through.
And it was about this time, September of 1988, that Brandy met a new friend at a local fair. We'll call this person Amanda. Brandy also met Amanda's brother that night, who we'll call Mark. Mark, who was 3 or 4 years older than Brandy, began to flirt with her. And Brandy was immediately receptive. This was the kind of attention and affection that Brandy had been missing for so long in her life. In an interview with Haley Gray, Julie said she wanted to be loved. She wanted to be accepted. She would have done anything, I think, because she didn't really feel that love and acceptance at home, especially after her mom abandoned her. So it's no surprise that Brandy soon had a giant crush on Mark. She even wrote "I love Mark" all over her shoes to let everyone know how she felt about him. She was also spending most of her time at Amanda's house to, you guessed it, be near Mark. And before long, the innocent flirting between Brandy and Mark escalated into a physical, sexual relationship. By now, as far as Brandy was concerned, she and Mark were an item, boyfriend and girlfriend. But everyone else knew that Mark didn't see it that way. But Brandy was infatuated and blinded to reality by her love for Mark. And she was about to drop a bombshell that no one saw coming.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Shortly after her 14th birthday on November 5th, 1988, Brandy informed her stepdad, Jerry, that she was pregnant with Mark's child. This came as an obvious shock to Jerry, but Brandy asked him for his permission to marry Mark. Jerry flatly refused. She was way too young, and he told her she would have to wait until she turned 18. But Brandy wouldn't accept no for an answer. She argued that she and Mark would just go to Iowa and get the marriage consent from her mother. It's important to note that Jerry isn't the only person that Brandy told about this pregnancy. She was also spreading the word of the pregnancy amongst her friends, saying things like, "When my boyfriend finds out, he's going to kill me." Brandy's cousin Julie didn't understand why Brandy was under the impression that Mark would agree to marry her. She said in an interview, "I really don't have that part of it figured out," because she had to have known that Mark didn't feel the same way about her. I don't understand why she thought that if she told Mark she was pregnant and said, "We have to go to Iowa to have my mom sign the papers," that he would do that. Then on November 9th, Brandy told Jerry about a birthday party that some of her friends were throwing for her the next day. But when Jerry pressed Brandy for more information about the party and who was hosting it, she couldn't give him a straight answer, only that it was being held at the old John Emery house. To this day, no one is quite sure who organized Brandy's belated birthday party. Jerry didn't like the sketchy details about this supposed birthday party, so he refused to take her. But Brandy was relentless with her pleading, so Jerry finally gave in. The day of the party, Brandy spent most of the afternoon at home, writing a letter to Mark, presumably to inform him of the pregnancy. Julie believes that Brandy intended on giving him this letter the night of the party. And later that evening, Jerry drove Brandy to the old John Emery house. He pulled his car halfway up the hill where the house was located and let Brandy out there. Before Brandy exited, she gave Jerry a kiss on the cheek and told him she loved him. And that's the last time Jerry saw her alive. Brandy had informed Jerry that after the party, she and Mark intended on driving up to Iowa to get her mom's consent for the marriage. So Jerry wasn't alarmed or concerned when Brandy didn't return home that night. He assumed she and Mark were doing exactly what she had said. She even told him she intended on staying with Mark's family after they returned from Iowa. But a few days passed and no one had heard from Brandy. And about this time, the hunters discovered Brandy's body in the crawl space of the old John Emery house. It was November 12, 1988. The hunters immediately called the police. When authorities arrived, they pulled the boards away from Brandy's fully clothed body. She had a point-blank .22 caliber gunshot wound in her forehead, above her right eye. There were no signs of a struggle. As I mentioned earlier, there were papers found near Brandy's body. Among them was a positive pregnancy test result. A Post-it note was also found that read, "Meet me at the old house." The origin of the Post-it note was never determined. Did someone give it to Brandy, or did Brandy write it for someone she intended to meet? To this day, nobody has an answer to that. In the rooms of the home above the crawl space, investigators discovered satanic writings on walls and mirrors, various pentagrams and the number 666. Other graffiti included KKK and the word red rum, which is murder spelled backwards. A detail obviously taken from Stanley Kubrick's classic film adaptation of Stephen King's The Shining. Also found in the home were rope and wires hanging from the rafters, which led police to believe that the abandoned home had also been a place used for animal sacrifice. As with any homicide investigation, the first people that police zeroed in on were friends, family, and really anyone who had last been in contact with Brandy. They immediately contacted Jerry for questioning, and he was forthcoming about Brandy's pregnancy. He also told them about driving Brandy to the house for the party. And while Jerry was initially considered to be a suspect in her murder, he was given a lie detector test and was eventually ruled out. Police also spoke with Brandy's so-called boyfriend, Mark. Because he was romantically linked to Brandy and she was supposedly carrying his child, he was obviously at the top of their list. Mark told police that despite what she had been telling everyone, he and Brandy were not in a relationship and never had been. To this day, this is the only statement that Mark has given to the police. He's never spoken more on the matter. While police were conducting interviews, Brandy's body was simultaneously undergoing an autopsy, and it was determined by the medical examiner that the shot to Brandy's forehead hadn't killed her instantly. She'd survived approximately 15 minutes after being shot. The autopsy would also reveal a shocking fact. Brandy hadn't been pregnant at the time of her death, and never had been. So why had she been claiming she was pregnant when she wasn't? And more importantly, how had Brandy come into possession of a positive pregnancy test? 2 days after Brandy's body had been discovered, Sheriff Eddie King held a press conference and asked the public for help in finding out more information about Brandy's killer or killers. "We need something on this one," he said. "We absolutely need something on this one. The last thing that a person might think is important might help us." The press grilled Sheriff King about the possibility of a satanic ritual connection to Brandy's murder. And King said, "At this time, I wouldn't rule out anything. From all indications we're getting, it could be. A lot of people have been giving us information that would tend to lead you to believe that it is involved." Even Coal Hill Mayor Bentley Yates kept the satanic ritual angle alive, telling the media that a satanic cult had been reported in the area. And it was suggested that other murders and suicides in the county may have been related to devil worshiping. Johnson County authorities did have suspects early on, a group of kids who had supposedly been involved in devil worship. Sheriff King indicated that the suspects were identified through physical evidence found at the old John Emery house. There were about 50 items that had been turned over to the state crime lab in Little Rock, Arkansas. But not everyone was buying the satanic angle. Mark's mother, Jamie Hamrick, spoke to the media shortly after the murder, and she said that the old John Emery house was nothing more than a place where teenagers smoked weed and drank alcohol. Jamie found the idea of kids worshiping the devil preposterous, saying, "You know how old houses are. They just attract kids." Jamie also said she sympathized with Brandy's home life situation. While she never acknowledged the supposed sexual relationship that Brandy was having with her son Mark, Jamie did say that she had allowed Brandy to stay in her home because she, quote, felt sorry for her.
But Julie remembers a different reaction from Jamie the last time Brandy had been hanging around her home. There'd been an argument, some kind of altercation between the two of them, and Julie says that Jamie told Brandy that if she ever came back, she would kill her.
Julie was also curious as to why Jamie was at the scene of Brandy's murder just days after her body had been found. The Arkansas Gazette had arrived in Johnson County to conduct interviews with the sheriff's department and visit the old John Emery house and take photographs. But when they arrived, Jamie was on the property, just looking around the house. Julie said, "That's why they were interviewing Jamie, because she was there. I thought it was kind of strange that she was there after the murder had happened. And by November 18th, investigators were ruling out any further rumors about the satanic connection to Brandy's death. Sheriff King told the Associated Press that any devil worship activity in the John Emery house had been performed by dabblers, and that none of it had anything to do with Brandy's death. King said Brandy's murder was not a ritual killing. He even added that they had a suspect and were on the verge of an arrest, and further revealed that Brandy's false pregnancy test may have contributed to her murder. There wasn't another update to Brandy's case until the early part of the next year. But in the time between November of 1988 and January of 1989, there were a few noteworthy things that did occur. First, someone torched the old John Emery house, and it burned to the ground, completely destroyed. Secondly, Mark moved out of the state. Police had narrowed down their list of suspects in the case. Several people had been questioned and polygraphed, but there wasn't enough evidence against these suspects to make arrests. According to Julie, the two suspects were Mark and his friend Billy, who lived near Mark's home. Billy and his wife would let Mark hang out with them at their house, which often involved smoking pot and drinking beer. But of the two, Mark was considered the main suspect. It was allegedly confirmed to Julie by those close to the case that Mark was strongly believed to be the one who killed Brandy. Julie said she was told this by the deputy prosecutor, the sheriff, a special investigator with the state police, and several other detectives. According to the police, inaction in the investigation was due to the lack of evidence, or more specifically, the kind of evidence the police needed to make an arrest. Because even if investigators had acquired the weapon, the literal smoking gun that had been used to kill Brandy, there were enough ballistics discrepancies that would have stood in the way of police making a match. Despite having two suspects that police earnestly believed were in some way involved with Brandy's murder, the case went cold. It was simply a matter of not having the appropriate evidence with which to tie to Mark and Billy. So Brandy's case stalled and didn't receive any further attention until 2008, when some new physical evidence surfaced. As far as this newer evidence is concerned, the police have never made any of it public, so we're not sure what it consists of. But it was enough for investigators to send it off to the state crime lab and then conduct more interviews. One of the people interviewed was Mark's friend Billy. Billy agreed to tell everything if he was granted immunity. But the prosecuting attorney wouldn't agree to those terms. And once again, the case went cold.
Police have kept an eye on Mark over the years, and his story continues to offer up more and more suspicious details. Since he moved away from Coal Hill in late 1988, Mark has been investigated in the disappearance of one woman and the deaths of two others.
In 1994, Mark was the suspect in the disappearance of Michelle Burchell, who went missing from Bardwell, Kentucky on May 27th of that year. She was last seen leaving the home of her parents with Mark. They were headed to the doctor because Michelle was pregnant with Mark's second child. But their relationship had been anything but perfect. Mark had previously assaulted Michelle, as well as threatened her life. Her purse, car keys, and loose change were later found on a secluded dead-end road off Kentucky Highway 703. And at the time of this recording, Michelle has never been found. There are two other Kentucky women who had romantic ties to Mark who have also died at different times throughout the years, both of which have been reported as suicides. First, there was 15-year-old Sue Ann Geyser. Sue Ann allegedly shot herself with Mark's .22 caliber rifle in January of 1992, just a few days after discovering she was pregnant. Mark and Sue Ann had plans to go on a double date with another couple, but they got into an argument or a fight just prior to the time of the date, and Sue Ann refused to go. Mark stormed out of the house and got into the car with the other couple, determined to go on the date without her. But at the last minute, he decided to go back inside the house and talk Sue Ann into coming along. Minutes later, the couple in the car heard a loud pop, and Mark rushed back outside saying that Sue Ann had shot herself. And the other woman, who we've been asked not to name, was said to have hung herself from a door inside a trailer home in October of 2005. There's a lot of speculation surrounding her death because she was apparently taller than the door from which she hung herself. There are also other rumors of people dying when Mark was around, like a girl that supposedly jumped in front of a train while she and Mark were walking along railroad tracks, and the 80-year-old owner of the ham store where Mark worked, who was randomly robbed and murdered one night. It's a Clinton, Kentucky homicide that remains unsolved to this day. Across the years, Brandy's cousin Julie hasn't stopped being an advocate for finding justice for Brandy's murder. Frustrated by police and the lack of activity toward bringing the cold case back into the spotlight, Julie has started a Facebook page called Brandy Hutchins, the Disposable Child. From the very beginning, Julie has wrestled with the perception that people have had of Brandy, just some troubled kid whose death didn't seem like that much of a loss. The main point and purpose of Julie's Facebook page is to keep the conversation going about Brandy and what happened to her back in the fall of 1988. Julie's page has generated a lot of activity, including plenty of theories about what happened to Brandy, as well as direct messages to Julie from people with opinions about who they think might be involved and why. But the page has also reunited Julie with several of Brandy's friends that Brandy was hanging out with in the weeks leading up to her murder. And it was through these online conversations that Julie learned some interesting information about the time around Brandy's 14th birthday. So around this time, Brandy had been hanging out with a friend who we'll call Lydia. Lydia, who was only 15 years old, had recently gotten married and was pregnant. One night while staying at Lydia's house, the two of them devised a joke to play on Mark. The plan was that Brandy would take some of Lydia's urine to the Pregnancy Help Center in Clarksville, Arkansas, and then use it for a pregnancy test as proof that she was pregnant.
Julie's still not certain that this was meant to be a practical joke at all. Maybe Brandy was jealous that Lydia was pregnant and thought that a positive pregnancy test of her own would be enough to make Mark commit to a more serious relationship with Brandy. Marriage, even.
It was also during this time over at Lydia's house that someone told Brandy that friends wanted to host a birthday party in her honor. Brandy was allegedly given a note that instructed her to meet up at the old John Embry house, which sounds suspiciously like that Post-it note that was found near Brandy's body. To this day, Julie continues to search for her own answers, but with little help from Johnson County law enforcement. And it's obvious to Julie that they would just rather her forget about it. For example, when Julie met with two detectives again in 2022, she was told to stop calling them and to stop asking questions. They would contact her in 2 months to give her an update on where things stood. That call never came. Additionally, Julie says that police never sought third-party investigative resources to assist in Brandy's case. She says that she has begged investigators to reach out to Parabon Nanolabs to do genetic testing on the existing crime scene DNA, but police have rebuffed her. Julie says they've told her they have their own resources, but never specified what those resources are. Former Sheriff Eddie King spoke up in January of 2023 about the case. He said that when he was sheriff, he had enough evidence in the case to charge a couple of people with Brandy's murder. But the prosecutor wanted to have a murder weapon before filing charges. King says, "We had bullet samples, but back then they didn't have DNA like they have now." He also mentioned that a medical examiner did scrape under Brandy's nails, but they told him they were never able to get anything off of it. Even Brandy's father, Jerry, has lost faith in finding out what happened to Brandy. In an interview with the Daily Citizen, he said, "I wish I could go back and do it differently. But in the end, I think it was covered up. I have multiple examples of how the police failed. And I don't know if they are still working on this case or not. They don't ever tell me anything." As for Julie, well, she has her own idea of what really happened to Brandy all those decades ago. To her, it's the most obvious and plausible scenario. Brandy followed through with the plan to make Mark believe she was pregnant. She wrote it in her letter, the one she wrote the day of the party and intended to give Mark that night. Jerry drove Brandy over to the old John Emery house and dropped her off about halfway up the hill. And when Brandy walked up to the house, she discovered the home was empty. Mark's house was a quick walk from the John Emery house, accessible by four-wheeler trails that cut through nearby woods. More than likely, Brandy walked to Mark's home and was confronted by Mark's mother, who had already threatened to kill her if she ever returned to their home. At this point, it's possible that Brandy told Mark, and maybe even his mother, that she was pregnant, showing them the proof she had in the pregnancy test. That's when Julie believes things went sideways. That moment could have been the catalyst for Brandy's murder. Again, this is all speculation on Julie's part. Julie is still holding out hope for a break in her cousin's case. She'll never give up the fight to find the justice Brandy deserves. This case needs to be solved, she said. She was just a child, and I mean, she wasn't an innocent child. I'd be lying if I said she was. But let's remember, Brandy was only 14 years old. She had just turned 14. Brandy was like any other child and needed what every other child needs: love, acceptance, and stability. She was a child that never had a chance. Brandy was no angel, but she didn't deserve to die, and the people who killed her need to pay for their crime. Julie still sees Brandy's dad, her uncle, and helps out from time to time by picking up his groceries and running other errands. Jerry just turned 80 years old, and it's still hard on him knowing that he drove Brandy to the place she would eventually be found dead. Julie says that it would be nice to give him some peace in seeing the case solved. And to anyone listening who knows something about what happened to Brandy back in November of 1988, no matter how small the detail, Julie says, come forward. Please come forward. It's been so long. Be sure to follow Julie's Facebook page. It's called Brandy Hutchins, The Disposable Child. And of course, anyone with information about the murder of Brandy Hutchins can call the Johnson County Sheriff's Crime Tips hotline at 479-705-8477. A childhood friend of Brandy's is offering a $5,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest and conviction of Brandy's murderer.
Make sure to follow us on all of our socials at the Murder Diaries Pod. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcast or Patreon. And until then,
stay safe.
Bye.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.